The thunder cracked like the sky itself was breaking apart, and Emily whispered, "Why now?" Her chest tightened as the betrayal unfolded in front of her. She had trusted deeply, and now the truth burned like fire. Mark stood across the dimly lit room, his eyes cold, his silence louder than any scream. Emily said, "I gave everything to stand by you, and this is how it ends." He turned his back, unmoved, his shadow stretching like a wall she could not cross. The storm outside rattled the windows, mirroring her rage and despair. Emily thought of her years of silence, her sacrifice, her voice buried under fear, now erupting like a volcano she could not control. Her colleague Daniel hovered near the doorway, unsure whether to step in. His eyes betrayed sympathy but also fear of being swallowed by the chaos. Emily shouted, "You took my light and made me doubt every part of myself." Mark finally spoke, his tone ice cold. "You were never strong enough to stand beside me." The words pierced deeper than any blade, and she staggered. Emily clenched her fists as the storm wailed louder. This was no beginning. This was destruction birthing something new. The storm faded into heavy silence, and Emily sat on the edge of the couch, her body trembling. Daniel finally stepped forward saying, "You can't let his words define you." She shook her head, voice breaking. "He was everything I believed in, Daniel." He crouched beside her, eyes fierce. "No, Emily, he was only a mirror reflecting the doubts you already carried." The words cut deep, because they were true. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, memories crashing like broken glass. She whispered, "I don't even know who I am without this pain." Daniel's tone softened. "You're stronger than you've ever allowed yourself to see." Morning arrived with pale light, seeping through blinds, casting bars across Emily's weary face. She stood at the window, staring at the soaked streets. "Every dream feels smaller now," she whispered. Daniel, leaning against the kitchen counter, replied, "Dreams don't shrink, Emily. Fear makes them look distant." She turned, eyes still red, but a flicker of defiance sparked within. "If fear is all I've known, how do I unlearn it?" Daniel answered, "One step at a time, even if it feels like walking on broken glass." Emily walked through the crowded office, every eye await, pressing against her fragile resolve. Mark passed by, his cold smirk stabbing at her, but she lifted her chin. Daniel approached, muttering low, "Ignore him. Power feeds on your silence." Emily said, "Then maybe it's time to speak even if my voice trembles." Daniel gave a faint smile. "That's the sound of courage." She breathed deeply, her steps heavy but deliberate, the walls of her old fear cracking slowly. Emily sat alone on a park bench, night sky heavy with lingering storm clouds. The city hummed around her, but she heard only her breath. She whispered, "I've lived in shadows too long." The wind rustled leaves, carrying her words. Daniel appeared behind her, voice firm, "Then step into the light, Emily." She looked up at the dim stars, eyes narrowing with resolve. "Tomorrow, I start again." The silence felt sacred, a fragile vow etched into the night. Morning light spilled into Emily's small kitchen, soft but unforgiving. She sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. She whispered, "What if all of this was for nothing?" Her voice cracked under the weight of fear. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes steady. "It's never for nothing if you survive it, Emily." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Surviving isn't the same as living." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is the part where you begin to live." The silence thickened with unspoken memories. Emily thought of her parents' words, the quiet criticisms that had shaped her doubts. She pressed her palm against her chest, whispering, "I was always invisible." Daniel leaned forward, voice sharp, "Not invisible, just unseen by people who didn't know your worth." Emily walked past a cracked mirror in the hallway, pausing. Her reflection looked like a stranger. She whispered, "Who are you now?" Her eyes brimmed with doubt. Daniel's voice echoed from the living room, "Someone worth fighting for." She pressed her fingers to the mirror, the cold glass reminding her how fragile she felt. "I don't know if I can," she muttered. Daniel stepped into view, his tone unwavering. "You've already survived worse, Emily. This is just another scar waiting to heal." Her throat tightened as old memories surged. Childhood whispers, workplace ridicule, Mark's betrayal. The mirror fractured her reflection, but in the cracks, she felt something stir. An ember refusing to die. The office buzzed with chatter and clattering keyboards. "Oh." Emily moved carefully through the maze of cubicles, her heart pounding. Mark's laughter carried across the room like poison. She whispered under her breath, "Don't look at him." Daniel appeared beside her, carrying files. "Focus on your work, not his shadow," he muttered. She swallowed hard, whispering, "His shadow feels heavier than my own." Daniel gave a half smile, "Then let yours grow larger, Emily." She sat at her desk, staring at the screen, Mark's voice still clawing at her ears. But Daniel's words lingered louder. She straightened her back, her fingers pressing hard on the keyboard, as if carving her will into every word she typed. Emily walked into the break room, voices hushed as soon as she entered. She felt eyes on her, whispers she could not hear but could feel cut into her skin. She clenched her fists, whispering, "They see weakness." Daniel entered moments later, grabbing a coffee, ignoring the stares. He looked at her with a faint smirk. "Let them talk, Emily. Words can't drown you unless you stop breathing." She swallowed, her throat dry, but they echo louder than storms. Daniel set his cup down, his tone sharpened. "Then drown their echoes with your voice." For the first time she lifted her chin, her gaze steady on those who mocked her. The silence shifted, not in her favor, but not against her either. It was hers now. The sun was setting as Emily walked home, the streets bathed in golden light. Each step felt heavy but deliberate. She whispered, "I don't want to live as the girl who hides anymore." Daniel walked beside her, hands in pockets, voice calm. "Then don't. Take one step each day away from the shadows." Her breath fogged in the cooling evening air, the city's hum carrying her words into the wind. "I've lived small for too long," she admitted. Daniel's eyes softened. "Small doesn't mean weak. But you, Emily, were never meant to stay small." Her lips pressed into a trembling smile. The sky dimmed, but for the first time she felt light in her chest. She whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll speak." And with that vow her steps grew steadier. The boardroom air was thick with tension as Emily entered, her stomach coiled in knots. Mark sat at the head of the table, his smirk subtle but venomous. Emily whispered under her breath, "Stay steady." Daniel leaned near her, muttering, "You belong here, don't forget that." The meeting began with Mark twisting the narrative, painting Emily's hard work as his own. Each word cut like glass. She clenched her hands under the table, her nails biting into her palm. Daniel's foot tapped against hers, grounding her. Emily finally said, "The project's results were not achieved alone, and I won't let silence steal truth anymore." Her voice trembled, but held firm. The room went still, eyes flicking between them. Mark's jaw tightened. She felt the quake in her chest, but for once she didn't collapse under it. After the meeting, Emily stumbled into the restroom, her breath uneven. She gripped the sink, water dripping from the faucet like a slow heartbeat. "Why does it feel like drowning?" she whispered. Her reflection stared back, pale and trembling. Daniel knocked softly on the door, calling, "Emily, you spoke when you wanted to hide. That's not weakness, that's fire." She shook her head, whispering, "It felt like breaking." He replied firmly, "Sometimes breaking is the first step to becoming unbreakable." Her reflection shimmered in her tear-stained eyes, not of defeat, but of someone beginning to rise. Later that night, Emily walked alone through rain-soaked streets, headlights streaking like blurred memories. She whispered, "How many storms until I stop breaking?" The city's hum surrounded her, indifferent yet alive. Daniel's voice echoed in memory, "Fire is born in storms." She exhaled, pressing her hand against a brick wall to steady herself. She thought of every voice that had silenced her, every moment she had shrunk into corners. Her lips pressed tight as resolve sparked. "Not anymore," she muttered into the rain. The storm did not answer, but her words felt like an oath. At the office the next day, Emily entered the elevator, and Mark stepped in behind her. The silence pressed like lead. He leaned closer, whispering, "Your little outburst won't save you." Her pulse quickened, but she met his gaze in the mirrored wall. It wasn't for saving, it was for truth. His smirk faltered for a heartbeat. The elevator hummed, rising floor by floor, tension thickening. Emily gripped her bag strapped tightly, but kept her voice firm. "I'm done letting you define me, Mark." He looked at her with mock amusement, but his clenched jaw betrayed unease. For the first time, she realized the power of not shrinking. Emily sat across from Daniel in a quiet cafe, steam rising from untouched cups. She whispered, "He wants me to fall, Daniel." He leaned forward, his tone blunt, "Then don't give him the satisfaction." She stared at the table, fingers tracing circles. "I'm afraid of what comes after." Daniel said sharply, "Fear is just a cage you've lived in too long." Her eyes lifted, flickering with fragile fire. "What if I fail?" Daniel's gaze was unwavering. "Then fail standing tall, not hiding. That's the only way you'll ever win." She felt her chest tighten, not with despair, but with something new, a hunger to rise. Emily stood in the office corridor, voices rising from the conference room where her name was being torn apart. Colleagues whispered cruelly, her mistakes magnified into weapons. She pressed her back to the wall, whispering, "They want me gone." Daniel appeared beside her, his voice blunt but steady. "Let them talk. Their words only matter if you let them choke you." Emily clenched her jaw. "It feels like drowning in venom." Daniel's gaze sharpened, then breathed fire instead. The noise from inside grew louder, mocking laughter echoing. Emily closed her eyes, hearing every sneer like chains tightening. Her fists curled as anger and shame collided. "If I keep silent, I'll vanish," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "And if you speak, you'll finally exist." Emily entered the break room, voices cutting off mid-laughter. A woman muttered under her breath, and others smirked. Emily's throat tightened, but she forced herself to pour coffee, her hands shaking slightly. She whispered, "I will not hide." Daniel entered moments later, grabbing a mug casually, his eyes flicking across the room. "Ignore them, Emily," he said lowly. She whispered back, "Their silence is heavier than their words." He responded, "Then speak until silence belongs to you." She turned, facing the group, her voice cracking but clear. "If you have something to say it to me, not about me." The room froze, smirks fading. Her heart raced, but for the first time, she felt the power of defiance. That evening, Emily sat at her desk long after others had left. The office was dim, only the glow of her screen lighting her face. She whispered, "I've given so much, yet it's never enough." She scrolled through reports, her eyes burning. Daniel walked by, pausing at her desk. "Still here?" he asked. She didn't look up. "If I stop working, I'll lose everything." He leaned against her desk, voice sharp, "No, you'll lose yourself if you don't stop." She stared at him, silent, the truth sinking in like a stone. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. For the first time she shut the laptop, whispering, "Maybe I need to choose myself." Daniel nodded, his faint smile proud. The next morning, Emily stepped into the elevator, coworkers whispering as she passed. Mark entered behind her, his voice dripping with mockery. "Brave words yesterday, but you'll crumble soon." Emily gripped the rail, her breath steady. "Not today, Mark Gotti." His eyes narrowed. "You've always been fragile." She met his gaze in the mirror, her voice steady. "Fragile things don't survive storms." "I did." His smirk faltered briefly, anger flashing in his eyes. The elevator doors opened, and she walked out without looking back, each step firm. Her pulse thundered, but she carried herself taller than she ever had before. That night, Emily sat in her small apartment, staring at the rain streaking the window. She whispered, "I've lived in fear for too long." Her hands rested on the sill, trembling but steadying slowly. Daniel sat across the room, arms crossed, quiet but present. "Fear only wins if you stop moving," he said. Emily turned, her voice firmer. "Then tomorrow, I move forward." The storm outside softened to drizzle, the city lights glowing faintly through the mist. Emily breathed deeply, her reflection in the glass no longer shattered, but beginning to mend. She whispered, "I will rise." Emily opened her email late at night, exhaustion heavy in her eyes. Her breath caught when she saw a message forwarded anonymously. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open. Inside were documents proving Mark had stolen her work for years, hiding behind lies. She whispered, "All this time." The weight of betrayal deepened, but so did a sharp clarity. Daniel appeared at her door, concern etched in his face. "Emily, what is it?" She turned, voice trembling but strong. "Proof. Proof of everything he's done." Daniel's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his voice low and firm. "Then this is no longer just survival. This is war." Emily laid out printed documents across her kitchen table, each page a nail in Mark's coffin. She whispered, "How many years of silence did this cost me?" Daniel scanned the papers, his jaw tightening. "He built his empire on your back." Her chest rose and fell sharply, fury mixing with release. "Every time I doubted myself, it was his shadow pushing me down." Daniel met her gaze, voice sharp, "Then use this to burn that shadow to ash." She closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "I thought my weakness was mine. It was fed by his theft." The truth broke her, but also began to rebuild her. The next morning, Emily entered the office with the documents clutched tightly in her bag. Her steps were heavy but determined. She whispered to herself, "No more silence." Mark spotted her across the floor, his smirk returning. Daniel walked beside her, voice low, "He doesn't know yet, and that's your power." Emily nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "For once, the truth is mine to hold." The fluorescent lights above hummed, the office chatter fading as she focused on the weight of justice pressing forward. In the boardroom, Emily placed the documents on the table with shaking hands. Executives leaned forward, whispers filling the air. Mark's face drained of color as he recognized the evidence. Emily's voice was unsteady but clear. "This work was mine. Every stolen credit, every lie ends today." Mark tried to interrupt, but Daniel spoke firmly, "Let her finish." Emily looked around the table, her voice rising with each word. "I was silent for years, but not anymore. I won't live unseen." The silence that followed was heavy with shock. For the first time, power was in her hands. The boardroom erupted with voices, but Emily only heard her own heartbeat. Mark leaned back, mask cracking into panic. She whispered to herself, "I'm not invisible anymore." Daniel gave her a sharp nod, pride glinting in his eyes. An executive finally spoke, "This changes everything." Emily's hand still trembled, but her spine felt unbreakable. She said, "No more shadows. I'll claim what I've built." Mark's silence was louder than his mockery had ever been. Emily breathed deeply. The first breath of a new life, knowing nothing would ever return to what it was. The boardroom was silent, except for the pounding in Emily's chest. Mark rose abruptly, voice sharp, "You think they'll believe you over me?" Emily met his glare, trembling but resolute. "They already see the truth written in your lies." Executives exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but cutting, "Your arrogance was always your weakness, Mark." Mark slammed his hand against the table, shouting, "You don't belong here, Emily." Her breath shook, but she raised her chin. "I belonged here long before you stole my voice." Mark's voice grew louder, desperation cracking his mask. "She's unstable, she's weak." Emily's hands pressed firmly against the table, her voice breaking through. "Weakness is surviving in silence. Strength is speaking despite the fear." Daniel's lips curved into the faintest smile. The executives leaned back, some whispering, others silent, but watchful. Emily's pulse roared in her ears, yet her words carried clearer than ever. For the first time, Mark's voice did not overshadow hers. Emily stepped around the table, standing directly before Mark. Her voice trembled with force. "Every scar I carry is proof of my survival. You tried to erase me, but I am still here." Mark froze, eyes darting to the documents spread across the table. Daniel said firmly, "He can't run from the evidence, Emily. Stand taller." She drew in a long breath. "This ends now. You don't get to write my story anymore." The silence that followed was a storm, broken only by Mark's shallow breath. Mark lashed out with trembling words, "You'll regret this." Emily's voice cut through, steady as steel. "No, I'll regret never standing up." Daniel's voice rang clear. "This is the moment she takes back what you stole." Executives exchanged looks, realization dawning. Emily turned to them, her words slow but powerful. "I will not be defined by silence or by thieves. I stand here claiming what I've built." For the first time, Mark's shoulders sagged, his power dissolving in the truth. The room was electric, with silence. Emily placed her final words like stones, unshakable. "I am no longer unseen." Mark dropped his gaze. The mask shattered. Executives began nodding, the tide shifting, unmistakably. Daniel leaned back, his eyes filled with quiet pride. Emily inhaled, her chest lighter than it had ever been. She whispered to herself, "This is my beginning." For the first time, she did not feel like a shadow. She felt like a storm that had survived and reshaped the sky. The boardroom was finally empty, yet the echoes of the storm lingered in Emily's chest. She stood still at the long, polished table, her hands brushing over the scattered documents, each page a reminder of how far she had come. Her knees trembled with exhaustion, but inside her burned a steady flame she had never felt before. She whispered to herself, "This is the woman I was meant to be." For years, she had lived behind walls of silence, believing strength meant invisibility, but now she had shattered those walls. Daniel entered quietly, his eyes locked on her with rare softness. His voice carried calm certainty, "And she was here all along. Emily. You just needed to see her." Her throat tightened as she looked back at him, tears rising not from pain but release. She pressed her palm firmly on the cool wood of the table, leaving a mark of belonging. "No more hiding," she whispered, her words quiet but resonant. For the first time, her voice filled the room as if it had always been meant to live here. As Emily stepped out of the office building, sunlight poured over her face, the brightness almost startling after the years of shadow. She paused on the steps, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the heat of the day settle on her skin like a blessing. The city buzzed with its usual indifference, but everything appeared changed to her. She opened her eyes, whispering, "The world never changed. I did." Daniel walked beside her, his hands buried casually in his pockets, the hint of a proud smile tugging at his lips. His voice was steady. "You finally stepped out of the shadows, Emily." She inhaled deeply, her chest rising as though she could finally breathe fully for the first time. The heaviness that had bound her shoulders for years now lifted into the air. She smiled faintly, saying, "For the first time, I'm not afraid of being seen." Daniel nodded once, his tone soft but unyielding. "Then they'll never silence you again." The city stretched endlessly before her, no longer a cage but a horizon. That evening, Emily returned to the park where once she had sat broken under storm clouds. The bench was the same, weathered and worn, but she no longer was. She lowered herself onto the wooden slats, exhaling deeply as though laying her past to rest. "That night I thought I was broken," she whispered into the open air. Daniel joined her, lowering himself onto the bench with quiet grace, his gaze fixed on her rather than the world around them. "You weren't broken, Emily," he said softly. "You were waiting to rise." Her eyes lifted to the sky where streaks of fading light parted clouds, revealing faint glimmers of stars. "I thought storms defined me," she admitted, her voice steady but fragile. Daniel leaned back slightly, his tone certain. "They shaped you, but they never owned you." She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the stillness. This time, the silence didn't feel like oppression but peace, the kind she had fought all her life to find. Back in her apartment, Emily stood once again before the cracked mirror that had once reflected her despair. She remembered the night she touched the glass, whispering she no longer recognized herself. Tonight, her reflection stared back whole, fierce, and alive. She whispered, "I see her now." Daniel's figure appeared faintly behind her in the mirror, his voice low but steady. "That's who you always were." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time they glistened like jewels of triumph, not defeat. She raised her hand gently to the glass, fingertips tracing over her reflection, as if sealing a vow. "I don't need to hide from her anymore," she whispered. For years, the mirror had been an enemy, exposing her fractures. Tonight, it became an ally, showing her the woman she had always been waiting to meet. Her faint smile carried both sorrow and strength, a quiet acceptance of everything that had made her. Emily stood at her window, the city lights below shimmering like scattered stars against the night. She pressed her hand to the glass, whispering into the silence. "I was unseen, unheard, forgotten." Her voice steadied, stronger with each breath. "But I survived. And now, I rise." Behind her, Daniel remained silent for a long moment before speaking, his tone quiet but powerful. "And you'll never fall silent again." She closed her eyes briefly, a soft smile breaking through. This silence was no longer the weight of invisibility, but the peace of a life reclaimed. Her reflection shimmered against the night glass, no longer the girl who cowered in shadows, but the woman who endured storms and emerged unbroken. The storm had passed, but its power remained in her bones. Emily opened her eyes, her voice a vow etched into the night. "This is my beginning."